Greetings all. Welcome back to the Coptimizer podcast. Today I have retired Chief of Police Michael Goold, and he's got a very interesting background, a lot of experience that we're going to touch on, and we'll work this into the conversation. But we're talking to a very high energy person right now, and we're going to find out what are the strengths of the high energy idea guy versus some of the other types of personalities, and how do we all make it fit. But Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Patrick. Great to be here. High energy. That's not what my first grade teacher told my mom.
All right, well, do tell now.
I think it was annoying.
Yeah.
It's all right. I did it twice. I had so much fun in the first grade.
I had some varying experiences in elementary school, but I was the youngest of 8, and I moved from the Philadelphia area to the Midwest when I was in 3rd grade. I came from the Catholic schools of Philadelphia to public schools here, and it was a different environment. And I found that in the public schools, they tolerated things a little bit better than they did in my previous school. Yeah. I won't say his name, but one of my lifelong friends, he was in my class, and he was probably a lot like you in his younger days, very high energy. And we had a couple of high energy kids in my classroom. In 3rd grade, my very first day in my new school, they get into a fight, and they're chasing each other around. And one kid picks up a chair and throws it at the other kid, misses him. And then the other kid goes diving out into the window into 2 feet of snow, no shoes on, runs all the way home. It didn't stop running till he got home, and found that out later. But I couldn't wait to get home to tell my mom about my first day of school. And I didn't know about the conversation that took place later with my dad, but it was a crisis mode. Like, oh my gosh,
what did we do?
What have we done to my baby?
You were the Fresh Prince of Lafayette. Will Smith fled Philly, I think, too, right? That's the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Yeah. All right, but enough of that. So you're from California, born and raised in California?
Yes, sir. Born and raised Northern California, Sacramento, my whole life, married life, professional life, and then retired 5 years ago and decided I needed a change of venue, just from all the experiences, really professionally. I'd go to certain neighborhoods. I'm like, oh, that's where that kid got killed. That's, and it just unfortunately been to a lot of homicide scenes. As just a lieutenant, I wasn't the real workers as the detectives, but I just needed a mental change of pace. And so we decided to move and looked at different states, and eventually, after a little bit, found wonderful and sometimes hot St. George, Utah. So we've been there for 5 years.
Yeah, that's a beautiful part of the country. It's a little bit different than Northern California, but
different beauty. We don't have Lake Tahoe or the beach, but we have Zion National Park, and Moab's not far away. Vegas is an hour and a half, so we're in a good little spot.
Yeah, and as I was telling you before we went live, I drove through there, and we were talking about the hours upon hours where you drive and don't see anything except for exit signs that say ranch. And I never saw any ranches. All I saw was dirt roads seemingly going to nowhere.
There's ranches there.
I'm sure there are. They're out there. But Moab's really cool too. Went mountain bike riding in Moab, rode Slick Rock, and that was a good time. So your policing career, you were with Sacramento Sheriff's Department, or okay.
23 years with Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. Last 3 as a chief of police in Rancho Cordova, which is a beautiful little city in East Sacramento, former military kind of town of part of Sacramento, and loved it. Had a great career, a blessed career. I think we talked about that too. Is it's not that I was great. I was just afforded a lot of opportunities working for a bigger department to do fun stuff. And CSI, ran a comm center for 5 years, got to be in detectives for 2 as the XO, and courthouse, jail, planning and research and patrol, and um, the rat squad for a couple years. But I even, learned some fun stuff working internal affairs. And um, I had just a great career, work with some wonderful, awesome coppers, and serve the good citizens of Sacramento County and Rancho. And now I'm giving back, retired, and doing my training and consulting.
Well, that's where I wanted to go next. And what I didn't do on the introduction is I didn't introduce you as Dr. Michael Goold, because you do have your PhD, and that I think is.
I drink my soda like this because I'm so.
Well,
I have a piled higher and deeper. Yeah.
So, what's your educational background? Because there is one other thing I haven't sprung that on you yet, but I will here in a minute. But yeah, so where did you go to undergrad?
Yeah, so I have a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Sacramento State. They have a great CJ program, and then a Master's in Organizational Development from University of San Francisco. And then, if that wasn't enough, I thought, hey, I'm going to go get a doctorate. So I have a doctorate in education from the University of Laverne, which is a small college in Los Angeles. A wonderful program. And at the time I was doing my dissertation, I decided to study traumatic stress in 911 personnel. I was running our PSAP, or our comm center. So my study, the title of my dissertation, and get ready for this, compassion fatigue, compassion satisfaction, burnout, and peri-traumatic dissociation in 911 personnel. So fun little study, about 300 pages long. And so I like learning, and I love education. So I don't always like school, because I got in trouble in school, but I love learning.
Well, I think it's the one of the, if I were to give advice to anyone that is entering into the profession today, and then we're having struggles recruiting and retaining young talent in policing. Just spent the last few days at the Indiana State House, talking about this issue and the concerns that we have here in the state of Indiana. I know that's everywhere. And well, yeah, I'm going to take my first little left turn here in this conversation. But when you talk about compassion fatigue and how that might impact recruitment and retention, they may seem like unrelated issues. But here's a question I started asking. Involved in a course where I was working with new chiefs. I do this every year, and I started asking the question back in about 2015, in the time shortly after Ferguson. When the profession's taking it on the chin, it's a lot of external pressure about policing and a lot of questions about policing. And I was asking the chiefs in the room, I'm like, how many people in this room come from a family where you either had a father, an uncle, a brother, a grandfather, somebody that worked in law enforcement? And a lot of those hands go up, right? It's this is kind of a traditional career where people, it's generational, and it has been. And so I asked the question, how many of you are actively encouraging your loved ones, your children, your nieces and nephews to enter into the profession? And almost no hands go up, and which starts to get concerning. And then the question after that is, if you're not encouraging your loved ones to enter into this profession, how many of you are actively discouraging them from doing it? And almost every hand goes up. So America, pay attention.
It's predictable, it's preventable, right?
Yeah, there's a little Gordon Grahamism for you, right? And
Thank you, Gordon.
Yeah, and you that is a huge concern, because that was in 2015. So I started talking about this in my Citizens Academy courses. Anyone that would listen to me, like, look, sure, there are always things that we can do better in policing, but uh, there, there's a big problem that's coming. If we can't get good people enter into this profession, um, this is going to be a crisis. And that was in 2015. Sadly, 2023 now, agencies across the last number I saw across the country was they were down 11%, but some areas are down as far as 40 and 50%, and it's much higher in your major metropolitan areas, lower in others. So why does this all matter when I say compassion fatigue? Because anyone that has been in this profession, that's done it long enough, knows the horrible, terrible things that you will see one human being do to another human being. The capacity for humans to be evil and horrible are limitless, but I think the capacity for any one human being to take that and absorb it and survive and thrive in it are limited. So it's it's this interesting juxtaposition where we really need to start thinking about, understanding not just compassion fatigue, but the stress from the profession, how it's impacting us, how it's impacting our health, our mental health, and our physical health. These things, they're all interconnected, they're all interrelated. So,
the third thing, or a third thing, is what's the impact on the community? You have tired police officers, you have frayed department, police officers, you have officers that can't get a day off because they're so short staffed. You have officers working mandatory overtime. Would you want your pilot? I flew 2 days ago. I sure as heck don't want my pilot running on fumes, but that is exactly what we're doing to America's police officers. And I know I try to be nice and give the benefit of the doubt to politicians who have concerns about policing. And I'm going to be generous in my grace with them. And there are others that are just, for narcissistic reasons, want to eliminate police. And either the narcissistic or incredibly stupid, not being nice now, I guess, but
that's just fact.
Is you're going to get what you're doing. And like you said in 2015, is who in the right mind would go into policing right now? And I'm reading a book on Rowan and Maine, the two original, the kind of the real founders of the London Metropolitan Police Department. They had the same struggles modern policing do: getting good recruits, keeping them on, getting them trained, getting them to do their job, everything. They're if you go back and look at, they kept a record, and all the cops they fired who were showing up to work drunk, the cops that would get drunk once they showed up to work, and just stealing stuff. We're seeing it again. It's not new, but the political force that was championing defund the police and bastardizing and condemning all of us had detrimental effects, and they need to, I'm going to call them out on it. Sorry. If you were part of the defund the police, you need to apologize, and you need to change your tune and become part of the solution, or head down a path of anarchy.
Yeah. And I've had this conversation a few times with a few different guests, and one of the byproducts of that, right, is what do we see in the 1920s in New York City, right? The turn of the century. What was, where was lawless? Who kept the law, and how did lawlessness affect community development? There's a reason why there were movies like The Gangs of New York. Sure, they're fictional movies, but they're based on real world accounts about how things actually were, right? Things broke down, became very tribal.
And what are you seeing right now? I mean, I don't want to get political, but you have communities where they have neutered the police and encouraged lawlessness. They just have, and you're seeing the people that are going to get hurt are the people that are supposedly these groups are trying to protect, and it's hard to see.
Yeah, I usually just boil it down to this, it's kind of a very simplistic explanation, but it's kind of like the same thing. Like, it's easy from the outside to cast stones and throw out opinions about what are the core problems, but we're all we want to do is point blame at the symptoms of societal core issues. um, when you talk about who's going to deal, and again, this kind of relates with what we're going to get into here in just a minute. If you have a police officer that his job mostly is going from call to call from one house, he's dealing with he's issuing Narcan, he's doing compressions, waiting for EMS to get there, fire because someone's overdosed from heroin, for the fourth time in the last month. Nobody there doing anything about that. And then he goes to a homeless person on the corner, then you go to a call that emotionally disturbed person causing a disruption. And I don't think people necessarily understand what that's like when you do that day in and day out and you see the despair. And these are they're quality of life issues that are social problems. They're not necessarily crime and disorder problems. They do create disorder, and generally that's why people call the police. And I will say, I was talking to one of our state legislators here who is working on a bill to reestablish some funding for state level mental health support. Yeah, people don't realize this. 20 years ago, a lot of these programs just got completely wiped out. We shut down our federal facilities that were doing treatment for the emotionally ill, emotionally disturbed, and then the states followed suit, did the same thing. And so there's where do people think the resources come from that are going to manage those issues? Because it all got dumped down into the city streets. So what happens? You have police administrators saying, look, these are community issues, so we'll help out. And so now we have programs like CIT and other things where we're going to train police officers how to understand and have a more compassionate approach towards the mentally ill. And oftentimes the mentally ill and the emotionally disturbed they're tied in with the drug issues because people have undiagnosed mental illness. They're self-medicating with either alcohol or drugs, and those things spiral out of control. And and so, and I'll end with this. My dad once, after I'd been working on the job for a few years, my dad, it just kind of asked me how it's going. I worked nights, just kind of one of those moments where I was like, I'll be honest, Dad, I at times I just feel like I'm a human garbage man. And he kind of was taken aback by it. And he's like, what do you mean? I was just like, look, like we're out there every night. Like, we're doing some good things, and the job was fun. I enjoyed what I was doing. I don't want to make it sound like it's all doom and gloom, but it didn't take me long to realize that there's a lot of societal issues that just get discarded and get pushed into the streets. And there's no accountability from certain segments of society to do anything about it. Their answer to the problem is call 911, call the police. I don't know how
Or
to
blame
solve
the
this problem.
police.
Well,
Yeah, blame the police.
and that's what follows, right? And so when the
Right.
police don't handle it the way people think that they should, or quite frankly, maybe they are handling a lot of these things wrong, or we have sometimes it takes a while to figure out what you're doing wrong before you can fix it and do it right. But there's no patience, there's no compassion for the police, there's no understanding that we're asking people to do a very difficult job. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that we can't get people to come in and do the job now. And it's definitely a grave concern. I still think that there is hope. I always say, like, I'm a glass half full person. I think there's things that we can do, but like you said, it's going to require people to take accountability for the decisions that they've made, to look at the results of some of our communities where we've seen a lot of these, like what actually happens when somebody is out on a parole or probation, for multiple shootings, multiple, homicides. It's crazy the people that are out walking around right now. And I think there's probably no more compassionate people in society than police officers. That may not sit well with some people, but I've seen it firsthand. I worked with a lot of amazing people that did anything that they could to help people. And wow, yeah, kind of a tangent there, but all interconnected.
Oh yeah, and I think when you're talking about compassion fatigue is people don't know, and what happens to on a regular cop, right? If they do a ride along, they're like, "Wow!" I've had friends do ride along that aren't cops, obviously, and they work in the private sector or whatever, and they're like, "I have never seen so much negativity in 8 hours." And I'm like, "Well, I do this 5 days, 4 days a week. Welcome to my world, you're right." And they're like, "People really beat that, like there's really that much domestic violence?" And I'm like, "Yeah, incorrigible kids and drunken publics and drunk drivers and people with warrants. That's the other thing. Everything's, oh, you go to court and you'll just keep going along." And I'm like, no, they go to court or they get arrested, they get a citation. They never go back to court. What's the incentive to go to court? They don't." And they're like, "What do you mean they don't go to court?" And they're like, "They don't give a crap. They're not going to court. They're going to wait till it turns into a warrant until a cop comes across them again, right? In some type of enforcement action. And like, hey, you got a warrant, we got to go. And then they go to court, then they get a new citation, and then it plays, and then it plays out again. They don't show up to court, and the jails are full, so they get released. And then they wonder why cops are, burn out, or like, I can't give a crap more. I'm not going to phrase this the right way, but a cop can't care more about society than society.
Right.
And to ask cops to care more about their communities than the community cares about their community, that's too much cognitive dissonance.
And we're seeing the results of that right now. And I think, and I was very fortunate. I had a great boss. I worked for a mayor. I was chief for 10 years, last 10 years of my career. And he was a police officer and a police commander prior to that. So he understands policing very well. And he also understands the importance of having the community resources and trying to get everybody working together to solve problems. So even for a community like ours, where we have a tremendous amount of support and we do have a lot of services available, one of the challenges that we face is we're one of the larger metropolitan areas in between Indianapolis and Chicago. So 16 counties. The major trauma centers are here, the hospital, the big hospitals, the social services are here. So we're not only policing our population, but we're policing, the mentally ill and the addicted from 8 to 16 counties. They're all coming into our area for a service. And, it's nice. It's great that we have those, the ability to help, but, and you see that kind of play out in similar form and fashion throughout the country. I've had the opportunity to travel and speak with police leaders from around the country about these kind of issues. And everybody is experiencing really the same core issues. But so, 2014, the Ferguson case, then you have the Minneapolis case years later, and now we're kind of seeing history repeat itself. And the Memphis case, I think, is just kind of, that should really be a serious red flag for everyone in America right now. They should be looking at that and saying, how is this possible that we're seeing this type of policing behavior in the year 2023 when we've put body cameras on a police officer and we've made people aware of what the expectations are, but now we're learning, well, maybe we didn't go through the normal hiring process to hire these police officers. Maybe we didn't vet them as extensively as we used to. Why? Well, because well, several different reasons, but primarily because there's not enough people coming to do the job. And then secondly, we're trying to force things onto police departments that are not occurring, I think in a designed way. So yeah, that's what you get. Unfortunately, it's pretty
History
sad.
repeats itself. I mean, right? Miami River in the 70s, I think this is not the first time that we see the predictable outcome of lowering standards to keep numbers up. And shame on us. I'm going to say it. Shame on us as a profession to continue to not learn from the past. I know it might sound academic or theoretical, but I think if a community can't staff its policing, it turns the policing over to the county or vice versa, or to the state or the feds. That if we're going to have chaos, we're not going to blame the chaos on bad cops. That's what I'm getting at. That if we can't retain good cops, we don't have a department. And it goes back to the old Peel principles. The public are the police, and the police are the public. And if we can't have a police, it goes back to the public. And that's not professional policing, but we have got to learn as a profession to not lower our standards so we could just put a body in a squad car or in a jail setting, right? Because it always comes back to bite us in the butt, and shame on us for not learning from that.
Yeah. So, and then that begs the question for communities when you know that you're running short, you're not, when your police department, when you can't recruit, when you can't retain, when you can't attract, you have to start asking yourselves, okay, well, we can't continue to ask them to do the same amount of work. And that's the discussion that one of the things we've been talking about. The calls for service are not going away. They're actually increasing. So you have increasing demand and decreased working staff to be able to manage this. So you can create some technology solutions. And I think there's some creative things that we're doing that can ease the burden, but those are temporary solutions. Those aren't long-term solutions. And those really just, you have to look at them as more of a bridge solution until we can find a more permanent recruiting and retention solution. And
absolutely.
So what services are you willing to give up? In the defund movement, we don't want cops going to calls where people are mentally ill. Well, what makes you think that the police wanted to go to those calls in the first place?
Because we're like the girl from Oklahoma, right? If
Yeah.
I can use a Broadway analogy, we're the profession that can't say no, because we're a service mindset. But if we don't have the resources, we can't go. Then if we don't just say no to people, then they're going to be frustrated. And if we don't have the personnel, we need to say no. And then those citizens, again, need to call the mayor, the state legislature, and go, hey, we need more cops. And what are you doing to help in that endeavor?
Yeah. And then I think it goes even beyond that, because the easy thing to do is complain, right? I can complain to like an elected official, and we hear this all the time, right? Our politicians, not a lot, politicians, in these trust surveys about, who's trusted the most. Surprisingly, like the police are still held in very high regard, uniformly across the country. Politicians are in the lowest regard, and that's not me saying that. That's I think that was Gallup. Yeah, it was Gallup or Pew. Yep. I knew it was one of them.
Gallup or Pew.
So it's easy to blame them, right? But who are the politicians, right? Who elects our politicians? It's us. It's right back on community. So it's kind of like, if there's not a sense of shared responsibility and accountability, then there is really, I think, not as much hope as we would like to have. So, in these communities where you do have strong support and you do have a good understanding that we're all in this together. And I think that term got really, at the end of like 2 years of COVID, I couldn't take it anymore. I was like, stop, please don't say that anymore. Like, I can't, I can't watch one more commercial.
A new normal then, Patrick. How's that?
Yeah, let's talk about the new normal.
I think that if I can is a a paradox in that is we need support, and I'm not the good people, air quotes, but the citizens, right? Those who support the police. The one of the quandaries is they don't have much interaction with the police. They don't see us driving through their neighborhoods at 2 in the morning doing proactive patrol because they're asleep. They're at work. We're handling calls for service or dealing with bad guys, air quotes again, right? So they don't have to interact with the police until their car gets broken into, identity theft, or something unfortunately happens to them, and then you're like, hey, sorry, I can't come out to your place of employment, your shop that got broken into or whatever because we don't have enough staffing. And then like, what do you mean you're not coming out? You got to take a report and do fingerprints and CSI and catch the guy in the next 25 minutes because I see that on TV. And you're like, yeah, sorry, we're not coming. We don't have the staff. And then they get all mad at us,
Yeah.
right?
Well, what am I
the
paying
poor
you for?
officers.
If you're not going to come
Right,
help me,
exactly.
why am I paying you?
That's the quandary, isn't it? And so that's
Yeah.
it's bad circle. But I'll just go back to it. Is if anybody's listening to this, is I'm just very passionate about not lowering our standards. If the community is going to go into chaos, it's not going to be because of bad cops.
Amen. Amen. So let's start talking about some of the things that we can do. Right, we complained here for a few minutes about what's wrong. So now, right, we're just having a discussion. So now
there you go.
Let's talk about solutions and a path forward. And your work, I think, is incredibly important, and I think it's also some of the last few interviews that I've done with active chiefs, former chiefs, the one thing that I'm really hoping that when we start talking about police officer optimization, and how do we improve performance so we can improve our communities, the backgrounds of the people that I'm talking to, I've always been impressed, right? And because I've been in the profession for a while, I've worked with some of the smartest people that I know, like very hardworking, very very intelligent, very educated, some formally, some informally. But here I'm talking to Dr. Michael Goold, a PhD, and you're willing to share all your wisdom, your knowledge, and experience to help us prepare the next generation, and also help people to understand what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, and where there's some cracks that need to be addressed. And so one, I appreciate all your hard work and effort, and thank you for your service and what you've done. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was about emotional intelligence, the emotional quotient, about why these things are important, and what are some of these traits that we think maybe can we select for them, can we screen for them, can we train them, what's the potential? Because when we talk about compassion fatigue, we know that the demands for the job aren't changing, and they're actually only getting there's
Harder.
only more pressure. So we have to prepare our people in ways that not only can they absorb all of that, but they can thrive in these environments and hire healthy, retire healthy, and be maximally effective while we have them for their time in policing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So it's ironic you say that. I'm visiting Sacramento. I'm in my son's house. You can't see it. I'm looking to the left as he has a metal cutout of his badge. My son's a cop here in Sacramento. His badge is the same badge number as mine. I'm proud to say that I was able to give him my deputy sheriff badge when he got hired. We were talking before we got started about how many in our profession currently would encourage someone they care and love about to go into this profession. And I don't know at this point, he's been on 5 years. I don't know if I would still recommend that he go into this profession, which is sad. I was the first one in my family to go into law enforcement. It was hard. My son, a couple years ago, 3-4 years ago, had a B partner was murdered by a criminal. My son and a couple of the officers had just gone to lunch, and finished their lunch break and got dispatched to calls, and his buddy gets dispatched to just a simple call for service. And and unfortunately the person in that call had a gun and killed his partner and shot and wounded another officer. He's buried coworkers, he's been to funerals, and I don't think, as his father and as a cop, I don't know how enthusiastic about him staying in this profession, but he loves it and he's good at it, thankfully. So to your point about emotional intelligence, is EQ. It's been around for a while. It's separates us, not separates us. It's the science behind dealing with people. That's the basic how I get it down to dealing with ourselves and dealing with others. Policing, public safety is the people business. There's laws, policies, and procedure, but when we screw up, it's not a policy procedure thing. There might be implications in that, but we're screwing up as a person. As we haven't been able to control our own emotions. There's plenty of opportunities in this, I'll just say it, in this job to get mad, right? We see things that are horrible and a normal person would get mad. Unfortunately, we got to stuff that in order to be professional, but that anger goes somewhere, that disappointment, that sadness, and it's impacting our profession. You can't, I don't know if you can see this, it's a black and white, but my colleague, Dr. Obed Magni, and I, another cop, another PhD, we have developed a public safety specific emotional intelligence assessment. And we're using that in our workshops and in our coaching. We just felt the other assessments were good, but they weren't as applicable as they could be to public safety. So we touch on 18 different areas, 18 constructs, we call them, with active listening and optimism and courage and compassion and empathy. We talk about these during our coaching and workshops. And there's so many implications. I just, before we start talking, went to the California Peace Officer Standards and Training website and looked at the learning domains for the academy, right?
Yep.
Defensive tactics. Is there an emotional component to defense tactics? You bet. Being in a fight can be scary because if you're losing, it's not fun. Power and anger, those are emotions. Being in a pursuit, interview and interrogation, right? You got to be emotionally aware of where you are, the victim, the suspect. Answering 911 calls, dealing with an angry inmate, how empathetic with, I don't know if you have an adult disclaimer. We're going to get real here for a second, right? No, but I mean, a 3-year-old that's been sexually assaulted by a family member. I'm being hypothetical, but it's based on a very real story, I have 4 kids and, I know what I would want to do if somebody hurt my kid, but the officer's got to remain professional and take that child to the hospital for treatment and an evidentiary exam. Has to be professional with the suspect because we want to get a confession and pass that person along in the criminal justice system. There is so much emotion involved in our job, but we don't do a good job as a profession, as an agency, to recognize, hey, this job is emotional. And again, it's not, be respectful here, but right, it's a very emotional job, good, bad, and what have you, the whole day. And emotions take its toll, which can lead to, compassion fatigue and burnout and all the negative things that are impacting our profession. But just as much, if we recognize and treat our emotions, that we can be resilient and we can have some grit and we can do things and we can get help. And last thing, and I'll turn it back to you, is we aren't going to be able to solve our problems with the community, the relationship and the trust issues without emotional intelligence. We're not going to do it with dance-offs and videos, and no disrespect to that. And I'm not trying to be super flippant, but we're not going to gain the trust of the community by lip syncing. We're going to do it by professional policing. And that's EQ.
Amen. And, it's funny you should mention that.
I just lost a bunch of customers, but that's all right.
No, you didn't. I think everybody, and it's, people, I can laugh about it now. I can joke about it, but when you're trying, when you're desperate times require desperate measures, right? And you're wanting to do really anything that you can to connect with people, where they are. I think this whole digital world that we've evolved into in the last, 10 years, but really the last 5. And, it's just accelerating. It's been, yeah, I think there's just this period of adjustment. And I laugh because I think people have tried to do some of these things for the right reasons. And then, it's like anything else. The further away you get from the source, it becomes less about connecting and more about replicating and like, oh, well, they, what's the
That's
number?
cops, right? Aren't we
Yeah.
great at like, hey, you got to steal that. Oh, they're doing that. We're going to do that. We'll do it better. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, right. I mean, God bless them. They had some agencies that just rock these videos. But I'm
I
sitting
know.
there the whole time thinking, what in the hell are you doing? If I'm a
Yeah.
citizen in your community, I'm thinking, yeah, but when my house got burglarized, you said you couldn't come out. You got enough resources to freaking, lip sync and dance and do all these great things, but you couldn't come to my house to freaking take a burglary report.
I know.
Okay, do I sound like a grouchy old man or what?
Get off my lawn. Get off my lawn. Get off my police department.
I'll pull my Clint Eastwood, quotes now. But seriously, could you imagine going into your doctor's office and heaven forbid you have cancer and you go to the oncologist and all they're playing is funny videos with the doctor and you're like, I got freaking cancer here, people. And not that we can't have any fun of policing. Please don't get me wrong, but we have a credibility problem, and you don't restore credibility through lip syncs.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think
now I sound like an old man.
No, that was the well, and that's again, the further you get away from the source or the why behind what you're doing. Mm-hmm. If you're just copying something, then you've missed the purpose of what somebody was trying to accomplish, and that's yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on that. I'll probably just keep a lot of them to myself. So,
I know, me too.
This is funny. Well,
but
hey,
seriously though, Patrick, be a person who's busting their butt in a crime-ridden neighborhood, who freaking worries about their family. They get up, they're keeping their head low. They're just trying to support their family, and they knew no fault of their own. They're just trying to survive. And the police, who are supposed to protect them, are spending resources and effort and their why to do something that's not helping them. You're like, great, nice video. I want to feel safe in my community.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about EQ and emotional intelligence, I think what you're saying is when I do call 911 because I've got an emergency, what I want is when somebody shows up, they're gonna care about me, and they're gonna show the appropriate level of attention and compassion and empathy that's necessary, and it's not going to be fake. Like I need to know that someone is here to help me and they want to help me, and that's and the fakes, people see right through the fake stuff, and in the end, I think some of those things that you're talking about, if an agency didn't necessarily do them for the right reasons and with the right connections, then I actually think that it can damage trust, not build it. And
Absolutely.
So you can't have that, and then on the one hand, not show up, just like you're saying, like I don't have time to show up for your burglary complaint.
Yeah. Hey, can I show you something real quick? You might not show you. Just
no, I'd love to see it.
Not tooting a horn, but
we do have some people that can't see, so we have to. It's show and tell.
Very good. Okay, so we have 18 areas of the assessment that we look at, like I said, accountability and so forth. What Dr. Magnin, with a lot of discussion, what separates the EQ and what's important to us is how EQ, and we call it the 4 impacts, but the self, the team and agency, the community, the profession, and then the community. So EQ impacts the self, right? And that's not a given, but so many problems that we have: anger management, lack of empathy, burnout, lack of courage, lack of independence, all these elements of EQ that, if improved, would really help the individual. When you have great individuals, they become a great team member, right? Because we still, for the most part, given a few variables, but we work in a team atmosphere. We have, work with the same people on the same shift or in the same, we work in a team atmosphere. We need each other. Great teams are going to help the agency, which then helps the profession. We talked about this yesterday at my EQ workshop here in Sacramento. Was and right, wrong, or indifferent, our profession is judged by its worst person.
Right.
not doctors, not airline pilots, not teachers, not preachers, certainly health, not politicians, right? Um, and that's good, bad, wrong, whatever. It just is. So we, as a profession, got to get our crap together and get rid of those one person that keep making us all look bad, and that's internal and external. But if we can work on those first three, the self, the team, and the profession, we're going to have huge improvements in our relationship with our communities.
So along those lines, before we move on to the next one,
Yeah.
um, it brings me kind of like the one thing that we hear a lot about lately. It's the bad apples. Like, it's the bad apples. And I hear this a lot. And so what I try to, and sadly, Memphis, puts a little bit of a hole in my argument here, because maybe in that case, because of, and again, I say this, I'm at arm's length, right? I don't have all the information. I don't have all the details. Those are things that we're going to learn in the months to come, for sure, because all that stuff will eventually come out. Maybe they did hire a few bad apples. There's always people that are going to get through hiring processes that have some things that we can't, that you're just not going to find. And that's another reason why you have an academy and you have a training program. That's why most states and most police departments, especially merited organizations, that first year of work is generally a probationary period where police officers are at will employees. Now, there are protections that are granted to police officers once they get beyond that, for very good reason.
Very good reasons.
Because we don't want undue political influences or financial influences or others to really affect the way somebody might police, right? We want fair and equitable policing across the board.
Yep.
And so you have to protect officers so they'll be willing to stand in the breach and do those things when it comes time. But my own agency, we basically averaged between 90 and 92% of candidates that came through would get screened out for one reason or another. So whether it's they can't pass a written exam, they can't pass the physical fitness test, they don't get through a background evaluation or an investigation, they can't get through a polygraph. All of these things, like, these are the vetting process that we're working through. We're testing for, pressure testing too, right? We want to see character, integrity, and things like, do they have, high emotional intelligence as best we can tell. They do a physical exam, a psychological exam. There's all these things, and a lot of good people don't make it through the process, not because of anything that they've done wrong. So sometimes, I didn't get hired, you must not be a good person. No, there's probably something. I didn't make it through the hiring process the first time because I had a positive, speaking of tuberculosis, right? I had a positive skin test for tuberculosis. That was a conversation that I was having before I came on air. So you're probably like, what's he talking about, tuberculosis? And I say,
spots on your arm.
Yeah, and I was like, I didn't get accepted to perv. So I, eventually, 6 months of antibiotics, several x-rays of my chest, like, okay, yeah, you've never had TB, your immune system's working the way that it's supposed to. And, but I had to sign a waiver that said if I ever got tuberculosis, I wouldn't be able to medically retire because of that. So that was a chance that I had to take on my own, which,
Wow.
I was happy to do. But either, I just say this because I want to come back to this bad apple, this, because it's such an excuse. It's an out for people to say, I think people hide behind that bad apple. We don't hire bad cops. We just don't. Like, yeah, maybe, you're talking 900,000 police officers in America, less than probably 1/100th of 1%, probably have something that's, that should have been caught that didn't get caught, or that could have been caught, right? There's just some things that you're just not going to know until they expose themselves. But but we're very good at breaking people. We're very good at taking good people, and here's what happens. You take a bite out of an apple and you set it on the counter. Come back an hour later. If that thing hasn't been sprayed with a bunch of chemicals, what we're seeing the oxidative process take over. Take a couple chunks out of it. Yep. And then if you're not doing anything to repair and replace and replenish and fix that, I mean, it doesn't take long for that thing to be a dried up, crusty apple core sitting on your counter. And it's the same way with people. If we're not investing in our people, and if communities aren't looking at their police officers as one of their most valuable resources, like, we have to invest in them. We have to start thinking about different ways to support the police. It can't be, the line at the door isn't there anymore. No one's coming. We've got to maximize the value of the officers that we do have. So we've got to take care of them. We've got to invest in them. And that's not just financially, because that's not why people come into the policing profession. It helps, right? They need to make a fair wage, and they need to be able to support their families, and they need to be able to pay their bills and their healthcare costs. But that's not why they do it. They are altruistic personalities that want to help, that want to make a difference, that want to have a positive impact on their communities. But what's happening, like we were talking about, that compassion fatigue, well, a person can only do so much for so long before they start breaking down. And if you give, if I can, the oxidative process begins to take over. And that is where the bad apples come from. And if there is accountability for agencies, there is accountability for our partners inside of the agencies to call out bad behavior, to call out these things when we see it. But, I guess my question, and maybe it's more of my rant here, is like, all right, knowing these things, like, how do we get communities to understand, like, if you have 100 officers and they're busy all day, you might have to pay for 150, because guess what? We don't have time to train. We don't have time to rest. We are overworking, and agencies are finding now, and communities, this is one area where I know communities are starting to feel it, right? Because who do you hire for your private security events? Who's working in your schools?
Off duty, your events, your coliseums, your track event. Yeah. Off duty cops.
And now you can't find officers to do that, right? Because why? They're hunkering down. They're starting to protect their free time. They're starting, and we are, I think, doing a better job of starting to educate them on the dangers of this overexposure to trauma. And now, the implications of that are that, there's only, you can only spread the butter so thin, right? And
yeah. Can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely. I'm going to shut up now.
There was a gentleman, and he was a black preacher from, I want to say, Chicago. He testified in Congress after Floyd, and it really struck me what he said. And it was along the same lines. He goes, the vast majority of people get hired in public safety are good people. But then the job takes over, and the trauma takes over, and the reality of society takes over. We have a violent society. We want to blame the cops and teachers and everything else of all of our ills, but nobody wants to go, why the hell do we have such a violent society? Right? And it's not, we want to focus on the gun. In England, they freaking stab each other. Okay, they don't have guns, but they stab each other, right? So I'd rather get shot than stabbed, because knives gross me out. But so we see that. You're right about there being overworked. And I don't know if that's an internal problem, again, because citizens don't know what we do so much. And I'd say that's bad on us. And I don't know how we share with citizens the reality of policing, the suicides of a teenager, the molestations, the continual domestic violence, the crap that we see. It took me a couple years and a hell of a lot of therapy to get rid of all of the crime scenes out of my head. The murder of a coworker. Thank God for EMDR and a good therapist. but it impacted my family. It impacted me. I mean, people don't know that suicide is the leading cause of death in public safety employees, has been for some time now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll say this because I'm a solution kind of person: is we need as a profession for IACP to get this, national sheriffs, FOPs. We've got to get together, and I don't think we have big differences. We all want the same thing, good people, and we've got to get together and formalize training and go, hey, this is a standard. Yeah, states can do their own thing, but we got to do it. And so we've got to take the bull by the horns and do what is right and professionalize our our profession, which was sounded redundant. And then just something you were talking about kind of hit me is I'm leery of. So I'm in higher education, right? I have a PhD. I love education, but I have seen a couple times where schools, usually like community colleges, run the police, and everybody gets in,
Yeah.
and there's no screening process. And then they're like, "Well, I thought I could be a cop." And you're like, "There's no way in hell you'll ever be a cop for whatever reason, right?" And
Right.
it's not a judgment thing, but and then they think, "Well, I'm going to be a cop," and they're not. And then when like in a person when an academy, if they're associated, there's sometimes with conflicts with the education code and the reality of like, hey, this guy cheated on a test. You might put him on academic probation in the school setting, but in the police setting, that's a red flag. We're not going to have people cheating on tests. He's gone. And they're like, well, you can't do that because he has rights as a student. We're like,
Mm.
not going to happen. And there's
Well,
pushback.
the
I've seen
Supreme
pushback.
Court has the Brady and the Giglio cases, and so uh, yeah,
But a superintendent or a college dean doesn't know what
they
the
don't.
heck
Yeah,
that
they don't
is.
know that, and they would,
Yeah.
and I don't. Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts about that, and we've had some good conversations so far about like the future model. If you're going to reimagine policing, do you take this combination? Like, or do you do something completely different? Do you try to model some of what we see in Europe and Australia, where they have these 2 and 4 year programs where you're hiring people specifically into people are going into these programs a lot like you would for the military, right? And they're being trained in an academic environment for years on the science of policing, and
Yeah.
then they once they make it through that, then they start the training on the street to become street officers. So it's a I think it's a much more academically vigorous background. It gives more time, I think, to teach some of these skills and things that we just, a lot of young people are coming into the job today that they just don't have some of these basic life skills, and they have to learn them. And learning them on the job is not necessarily an ideal situation because it's taken away from time and resources for things that we should probably be focusing on elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And with all due respect, certain aspects, and given our problems in policing, we don't want to be making mistakes that can happen in the academy happening on the streets with
Yeah.
people, right? Because of low EQ and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that those are some of the things that we see play out. And so, all right, that was that was item number one. I think we had 3 more to get through. So you can
I'm here
quickly
all
see.
day.
Yeah. So this is most people that are listening to this podcast are, we're probably preaching to the choir a little bit because they get a lot of these things. What I am hoping is that what we can get out of these is for conversations that can occur with fellow law enforcement professionals, with community leaders, and quite frankly, if you're just trying to understand what the problems in policing are, what the struggles are, what we're doing well, and where we need some help on this, that's also what I'm hoping to get out of this. And we internally, so we had before we. I just want to say this real quick.
Yeah.
Internally, we've and I have a friend of mine that's a professor at Purdue that I've done a lot of work with, and it's a question that I've come back to multiple times, like in our screening and our application process. People they like the MMPI. We can we can do personality screenings and things like that, when they're getting their psychological screenings. But yeah, I'm just wondering, you've got this document that we'll talk a little bit about, the 6 working types of genius, and some of the screening mechanisms that we can do. But I'm just wondering, are there simpler ways for us to screen for this? I've read a lot. I've looked a lot. I was going to show you, like I've read, I have the Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence. I've read
Yep.
his social intelligence. I have his book Focus. I've read a lot about this, and sadly, this is just one area where I just haven't been able to come to any kind of firm or confident conclusion.
Okay. Yeah. Can I get academic for just a second?
Absolutely.
So within the EQ community, the academic community, there's several papers on how to utilize EQ assessments specifically for evaluation purposes. I'll tell you, and I don't know if it is what it is. I had classmates that had prepped for the MMPI. There was a book or something out there on how to fool the MMPI. My concern is that when we give somebody, and then I'm holding up the PSEQ for those who are listening, assessment. If someone thinks, "Hey, there's a right or wrong answer," or if I say how I really feel, I'm not going to become a cop, and this is my dream. I want people to be honest, because we feel, Dr. Obed-Magny and I, that we want this to be used to develop people. Gallup, talking to Gallup, this generation wants development. They want personal development. If we can use EQ to help develop, train, and then develop frontline supervisors, executive managers, right? That's going to be great. Studies show that people at the top have lower EQ. So your chiefs have lower EQ than your line staff. What I will suggest, because I know there was an article in the IACP a month or two ago from an agency in Texas that is using this as an assessment, and also I think it's the background. I think you can pick elements of EQ: empathy, active listening, and a good background investigator. You can have a sheet like, "Hey, how's this person with empathy? Can you tell me when you've seen them be empathetic?" "Oh yeah, a neighbor died and they went over and raked their leaves and helped with the field." Okay, that's the kind of person we want in public safety, right? Well, how they a
Right.
listener? Independence. Well, I know he studied, he struggled in boot camp, but he didn't give up and he kept going and he broke. We want grit. We want delayed gratification, right? That's another element of EQ. So if we can tie in a background check with elements of EQ to see how this person has used EQ, and we educate them and we use it to develop people, then it's a good thing. I'm just, from an academic standpoint, hesitant to use it as a hiring. It's like, "Hey, you got to take this test, EQ test. If you don't pass it, you're not a cop." Well, then people are going to, right? People study for the LSAT and all these other exams. They'll do the same thing and they're like, "Oh yes, I'm empathetic to everybody. I love everybody," when they really don't, right? And a good background will ferret that out.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately where we've always landed too, is just making sure that, and that's why you have to do all the warm contacts and all the cold contacts and those background investigations. And for those that don't understand what I'm saying there, like, nobody's going to put a name on a reference list of someone that's going to give them a bad reference. And I think
Good point.
Cops kind of get that, right? Like, we're going to go around, we're going to talk to your teachers and others, and we'll do a very thorough background. But the one thing that that someone's never going to be able to guard against, quite frankly, is us. When you hit one person, you say, "Hey, can you give me the names of 3 people that also know this person?" And then so when you get to a couple of degrees of separation, then people, they're not going to be worried about, "I know Johnny used to hit the neighbor's dog over the head with a stick repeatedly, but he seems like a nice enough kid. I don't want to be the one that cost him, the ability to become a police officer." And it's like, well, those are exactly the types of things that that we're searching for and that we're trying to find, and we do that in a good background. So I guess maybe for anyone that's listening, that's probably a good piece of advice, is make sure that your background investigators have a strong understanding of EQ, EI, and how they can implement those questions in their interviews when they're doing the background investigations. And quite frankly, you know, and I know a lot of this too is done in polygraph examinations, but
what happens if we used it in promotions? That we did
yeah.
the same thing instead of just doing this packet, like this is all the great thing I did to be a sergeant. We interview your colleagues and and get the truth out, because we promote people who have stepped on other people to get that promotion, right? And if we encouraged EQ behavior and rewarded EQ behavior in promotions, you'll get more EQ behavior.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. You know, and every department is going to be a little bit different in the way that they run their promotions. A lot of times promotional processes, in order to be fair and equitable, are
Yeah, I
you
get
know,
it. Yeah,
yeah, I mean
the
it's
lawyer writes the exam, not the lawyer and the HR person.
well, you know, and it's yeah, it can be kind of difficult. And I sometimes I give a ton of credit. You know, we're a merited based agency, so you know, people always thought as the chief that I hired people, that I fired people, and then I promoted people, and I didn't. People got themselves hired, they got themselves fired, and they got themselves promoted, and they did that through interviewing with our civilian merit board. So it's a committee that's made up by, it's defined by statute how it's made up, but we may prepare candidates and bring people to the merit board that we think would be good police officers, but they're going to do a separate interview, and then they're going to review our packet that we put together, and they're comprehensive, and they make the ultimate offer of employment.
Okay.
And then depending on the way the merit, the size of the city and the way your merit rules are set up, like the rank of deputy chief all the way down to sergeant, those are all merited positions. So the merit board is the one that makes the promotion. So the benefit to that is, right, is you get this kind of a neutral third party that gets to evaluate all these factors, and then they make a decision. The downside to that is I felt bad for them in a lot of times, because they're trying to make the best decision in a 20 to 30 minute interview after having, you know, time to review the applicant's qualifications. And you just, you know, we know a lot of times people look very good on paper and they can be very good in an interview, but just like you're saying, they may have a low EQ and not be very well liked, but still get promoted. And then, you know, as an administrator, that puts you in kind of a position where, okay, now I've got to manage that person when I know that, you know, these are some of the shortcomings. So you have to try to work to build those things. But yeah, this opens up just this whole other you know, the discussion that we could have on just that process alone, I think, is days on end.
I get for the equity part and lawyer, right? I mean, departments. I think it was a couple weeks ago. There's a department I saw in the news that was getting sued for alleged, you know, discrimination. I get it, but just as much as in-house, as people know who deserves a promotion, who's the backstabber, who's the, you know, what have you, and it makes departments look bad when the wrong people get promoted and rewarded.
Yeah, and there are ways to try to get around some of these things, but it's yeah, sometimes, you know, the rules are the rules, and so you've got to operate within those boundaries, and it's going to be a little bit different for every agency. But to your point, I think that's, you know, again, in this reimagining discussion, what does that look like in the future moving forward? And just because it is that way today doesn't mean that it always needs to be that way. And it just takes, you know, people with a little bit of tenacity and a little bit of courage to change the system to make an impact and improve things moving forward.
Most definitely. Yeah, most definitely.
All right. So we've gotten way sidetracked.
I warned you.
I know.
Warned you.
Okay, so I did, I did want to, touch on just a few more things, and then we'll
Yeah,
wrap this up for this
cool.
episode, and we'll have to have another
All right,
conversation down the road.
great.
Um, so one of the things that you mentioned, and this is not something I've talked a lot about on the podcast, but I think it's important. When you were doing uh your work for your PhD, and you were talking about compassion fatigue and how it impacted and how it related specifically to dispatchers. You spent time supervising a 911 call center, a PSAP.
Yeah, 5 years.
So maybe yeah, and I don't know if you want to share these stories or not, if they get too specific, but what are some of the things that a dispatcher, when we talk about trauma that police officers are exposed to, they're seeing it firsthand. Um, Suicide, the after effects of homicide. I can go down a list, just like you were kind of saying earlier, like, right, when I drive through a neighborhood, I see it completely different than my family does. And I used to have to explain this to people sometimes, and sometimes my family just didn't want to hear it, right? Like, and it's like, so you're better off not sharing it.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
oh yeah, you don't want to know what happened in that house. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
oh yeah, basement of that house right there. Speaking of suicide, I mean, I don't know if I could say this or not, but I walked into a room where uh, a young man had killed himself, sadly, and I had a piece of his brain drop off the ceiling and fall on me. Um, that's not necessarily a story that you share at the dinner table. Um, and but those are things that happen. Another one. When my children were young, I responded to a scene where a 3-year-old was had died. It turned out that grandmother was babysitting. The kid was a very high energy child, wouldn't go to sleep, so she uh, took one of her prescription medication pills and broke it in half and gave it to a 3-year-old. And he died, and he's on the floor in the living room, and he's in pajamas that were very similar to my 3-year-old had. And so there was a period of time, like, you can't help but to see that over and over and over again in your mind. And so you begin to understand, like, how people can ruminate on some of these things, and then you start to project, right? And then it's like, oh man, if that can happen there, that can happen here. And you know a lot a lot a
It's
lot of a lot of bad things can come from that. So um
yeah. That's so. To your question is, I wrote my death. I was our comp center manager, 911 center manager when I was going through my doctoral program. Worked with some incredible people. The vast majority were just spot on. Came in every day. Were incredible with their own individual strengths and skills to deal with the public. Um, and some were struggling. And I just wondered in my head, what makes this person a veteran, but just every call's like the first call, if that makes sense. And they're compassionate and strong. And so that's what I looked at: compassion fatigue, compassion satisfaction, which is getting satisfaction out of helping people, burnout, which is organizational stress, and then peritraumatic disassociation, which is just a fancy word phrase of where you go in your head during trauma, right? So it's fight or flight, but how you and what you think about, right? So you're on that dead child call and your mind flashes to the same pajamas as your child. That's peritraumatic disassociation, because you're like, holy crap, that could be my kid, right? And
right.
there's a direct correlation between peritraumatic disassociation and susceptibility to PTSD, right? Because you personalize that 3-year-old automatically. It wasn't like, oh, it just happens. Our brain does that, and it familiarized that. If I can, may have, or could contribute to PTSD within somebody. So I looked at those phenomena and took the individuals who responded. About 400 911 folks in the state of California, 911 employees took the assessment. I had them also write their worst call, either radio call or 911 call, and there were this was back in the day before we had, online assessments. So I actually mailed envelopes and stuff, and they mailed them back to me, and I transcribed them. I had my now cop son reading them to me as I would until my wife walked in one night as my son was reading a really bad one. They
Yeah,
all were bad, and she's like, "What in the hell are you doing to our child?" And I'm like, "Saving a
yeah,
dollar? I don't know." And
yeah.
so that was
Now,
the end of that.
well, now you know why he's a cop, right?
Right? He's like, "These are cool, Dad," and I'm like, "Okay, we got." It's like 15. I'm like, "We got to stop." Um, but they do incredible work, and we forget about all the crap that we see in the field, patrol officers and so forth. They heard in their headset, and just so much psychologically that they have to process. They have to put, you know, a face with the name or a sound and a voice, and the mind's naturally going to do that, and that can cause significant problems. We were talking before we started recording about new technological advances that texting, video. I see the benefit of it, right? If we can do that, but we public safety leaders have to be cognizant, and industry leaders that provide this equipment, and elected officials who are going to, like, how come your workers' comp cases are up in your 911 centers? Well, they're now watching children die, or people burn up in a car because there's an automatic video that kicks on when it rolls, or my iWatch does something, right?
Right.
And all these technologies, I want to think they're good. I don't want to be the old, crotchety old man that hates technology, but we need to be very cognizant that there's a human side to that for dispatchers and call takers, and they're going to need the resources and like EAP and all that, all the stuff that the sworn get. But we need to be very cognizant that our professional staff and our dispatchers have that, because it's going to come at a cost.
And with that in mind, again, I like to think about, how can we be proactive? And again, how do we try to get out in front of some of these things, knowing that these are the things that the future dispatchers are going to be experiencing, and quite frankly, these are the things that our future police officers are going to be handling. What are some of the practices? And this is, again, I talk a lot about the work that they're doing at Performance Protocol, because it's taking this concept of executive coaching and bringing it to all levels of an organization, right? And you said it earlier, like chiefs tend to have lower EQ scores. Why is that? Well, that's one of the areas in which we focus on in the 120 some different categories that you can coach in. Here's something that we can make you aware of, and here's something that a chief, and once they're aware of it, they can now they can do something proactively. And it's not just chiefs, right? It could be anybody in an organization. Now they can do something to proactively engage in a process that's going to make them better. And so I'm just wondering if that's a really good approach to try to really invest in employees in a way that's going to improve outcomes for them, that they're going to be better on the job, and then they're also maybe not going to be as affected off the job as much.
Yeah, there's a gentleman whose quote is quite famous in our industry, and he should probably copyright it so he makes a little side hustle. But right, if it's predictable, it's preventable, and we always need to keep that in mind. And this is what's going to happen is predictable and thus preventable. So look in other industries. Coaching is huge, and unfortunately, I've been trying to get coaching for 5 years since I retired, and it's like, well, I'm not on a PIP. I didn't screw up. I'm not getting fired. Why do I need a coach? Right? Whereas you go to any Fortune 500 company, even the military is now in coaching. They're like, hey, congratulations, you got promoted. This is the contact for your coach, or these are a list of coaches that you could use. And it's just somebody that has experience and training that can help you go, hey, you know what? I went to that 3-year-old dead kid today, but I got to go home to my 3-year-old and I need some help. Boom. Right. And just talk for, an hour or whatever, and get that out of your head and get some help. And then I'll also say we need to give a voice to dispatchers, right? Because I'll just say is been my experience that decisions are made at the top and then pushed down and like, hey, here's your policy without even asking for their input, right? So we need to be very cognizant of that. And then just not being afraid to say no. It might be a great technology, but what's the human cost to it? And is the human cost worth it? On the headset side, do we have to stream an active shooter into the comm center? Maybe it's great for a watch commander or someone who's going to respond. And yes, maybe if you have the resources for another part of the PSAP to take that call and kind of be part of it. But if that dispatcher is still answering calls, still trying to coordinate units, they don't have time to be looking at a screen and like, oh, he's in classroom 7 now. They're hustling their butt doing crazy stuff, getting outside agencies and a command center. We can't overwhelm an already overwhelmed system because technology's there.
Yeah. And so I think that automation and processes, I think, is something to keep in, the back of our minds when we're developing some of these technologies. How do you offload some of this stuff that we're expecting people to do right now, that maybe there is a better way to do it. But yeah, it all takes time. But what it also takes is investment, and it takes resources. It takes an understanding that it's not going to happen on its own. And I think the one thing that we have to just really stop doing is breaking good people and then just replacing them, or looking for the replacement without really any compassion or empathy for how they got there. And I think that's one of the things, I think, in the social media world, in this digital world, it's really easy to get angry and to be outraged. And I know, and you could probably give me the scientific explanation for this about how the dopamine hits that people are getting when they're seeing, they're getting that confirmation bias, in their social media feeds, like, ooh,
and then the algorithms of the software.
Like, you
did that, pissed you off. Sweet, here's some more stuff to piss you off.
Yeah, you keep looking at all this angry cop hating stuff. We'll feed you more of that.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, the doom scrolling's been going on for 2 hours, and you're like, where am I?
Your blood pressure's at 200 over 190, and
I joke about it, but it's a real problem, right? Adam Gazzaley wrote a great book about that. Ancient Brains in a Modern World, I think, is the name of the book. There's only so much that we can process. Well, this has been a very fun conversation. We did go off the rails a little bit a couple times. Hopefully we didn't say anything that will offend anybody, but I can tell you this: we didn't say anything that wasn't true. And
oh, that's good.
Cops,
I like that.
Yeah, cops definitely. We do have the gallows humor is it's a protectionary psychological mechanism that doesn't always get received well. Without an explanation with it.
Can I just give a name? And for people who are listening, you said something that I think it gets lost. And as cops, we don't always do it the West way, or public safety professionals. If we didn't care, we wouldn't be in this job. I'm sorry. People who I worry about agencies that are giving hiring bonuses. Who are you recruiting that someone's coming into this job thinking, oh, I'm going to get a bunch of money? If you don't have a servant mindset and a servant heart, you're in the wrong profession. With that said, I saw it once in my career, a politician who showed up to a homicide scene. Actually, it was an explosion. It was a meth lab that blew up, and good for him for coming, because people were displaced and stuff. But I've yet to see an activist group come out and protest and ask for accountability and help in finding a dead kid or a dead, you know what I mean? Yeah. And when they come up and it's all, and I get it, I want accountability, and I do, but are you just here to complain and hate the police, or do you want a safer community? Because if you're just going to do that, when you're worthless, right? If you want to help make things better and make things better for the same group that we want to protect and serve, right? People that are vulnerable and representatives, so forth, right? I care about dead black kids. I always did, and I always will. But when you're going to blast me all the time that I don't care because of my profession, that just doesn't fly with me, right? I've seen too
Yeah.
many dead kids and too many dead teenagers, and the cops who worked their tail off and sacrificed a lot to honor those kids through convictions and helping them out, and the families.
Amen. Yeah, I don't think I could say that any better. And that's the that's the ultimate pressure test for any community, right? It's if you're asking the police what they're going to do for you, maybe the question you should be asking is, what am I going to do to help my community, which in turn will help the police? Because criminals always have a say. And we're, as much as we try and talk about being proactive in policing, we're being proactive in a reactive way. We're being proactive trying to understand problems that are a byproduct of the crime that's going on in a community. If people aren't committing crime, there's really, then that's probably why you got cops out making, lip sync videos. But that I'm not going to say that's not a bad problem to have. I mean, maybe that's the sign of a healthy community. I just think that the answer isn't blame the police when a crime happens and it's not solved right away. In any community, the fastest generally when you're going to solve crimes is when you get really good pieces of information from people that live in and around the areas where these crimes are occurring. People have that valuable information, and that's where that social connection and that trust is, that's where it pays off and why it's so important. If you want to look for a problem, areas in cities, even major metropolitan areas, they have pockets of areas where they have a lot of problems. And in those areas, you're generally going to find low trust, not just amongst the police in the community, but low trust amongst community members. Like, people don't talk to their neighbors. They don't know their neighbors. They're afraid of their neighbors. They won't interact with their neighbors. So you start seeing clearance rates for homicides that are below 80-70%, then you're going to have an accelerating problem. Sadly, in some of our major metropolitan areas, we're seeing those numbers drop to 10-20%. And that, people want to blame the police for that. And, I have a hard time thinking that's strictly a policing problem. That's an information problem. And that's a community problem that has to be solved at those levels. And definitely good policing is going to help. And in good partnerships within the criminal justice system, having DAs and prosecutors that are going to get out there and work hard, alongside their police departments, and they're going to prosecute and they're going to hold people accountable, and judges that are not going to have revolving door policies, because that. And I know I think people come from a compassionate, a place of empathy and compassion when they release career criminals and those that are having mentally mental illness issues or maybe addiction issues. But that's not a solution. It really is. And I think it's, what might seem like an empathetic and a compassionate thing to do is actually the opposite. Because what you're saying is, I care about this person and I feel bad for the circumstances that led them to live this life. And maybe there are societal problems that led them there. But by releasing them, what you're saying is that I don't care enough to protect my community by following through on my obligations, because I know there's a pretty good risk that this person is going to go out and do it again. And how do I know that? Because they've already demonstrated that. They've done it time and time again, yet we'll release them time and time again. And then we wonder why we have homicide rates that are shooting through the roofs in certain areas. It's not, this isn't rocket science, and you can wish your way out of it, and you can hope that things would be different, but that's not a plan, and that's not a solution. So everybody's got to work together. Everybody's got to get on the same sheet of music, and that's my
your challenge, right? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, no, that's our, and I think for you and me both is that's what we want. I think I'm not going to say I'm not that naive, but I can tell you the vast majority of criminal justice professionals, policing, that's what we want. We want to have good partnerships. Is it hard? Yeah. Do we have to have crucial conversations? Yeah. Do we have to take our lumps as a profession? Yeah. Does the community have to step up? Yeah. Right. And they got to take their lumps, like, hey, you keep electing these same DAs, sorry, I'm going to say it, right? You're expecting different changes from the police, but you keep electing the same officials who keep doing the same thing, right?
Right.
And Michigan State shooter, arrested, gun, all that stuff gets kicked down to a misdemeanor swing. You're like, we don't need more gun laws if we aren't going to enforce the ones we have. What good does more gun laws do if they're not making a change? So I'm not a gun person. I'm just saying it's kind of common sense, like you're talking about. But as a society, we got to step up and decide, okay, this isn't acceptable. And if you want to say that that's not acceptable on the police side, great, let's have that conversation. But it's also unacceptable for what's going on in society, and we got to stop that.
Yeah. And here's another truth, right? I'm very fortunate, right? I live in a community where I have all those things, and I had as a chief, I had all those things available to me. And we're a multi-jurisdictional area. We work very well together, and everybody's I think we're all pulling on the same end of the rope, and we do a good job. We've got a great prosecutor's office. But what I'm saying is that even with all those things in place, bad things still happen, and they're going to happen. And it's just a matter of scale, and like how long and how bad do you want it to go on, and how bad do you want it to get? And I think we're seeing that in some areas, and it's time. Yeah, it's time. Time to take a long look in the mirror and say, what's my role in this, and how can I make it better?
Yep, absolutely. We saw,
All right.
plenty of examples of where it's going on. So
Yeah,
but
right.
EQ is great. Coaching is great. We need to, as a profession. Yes, we can work on the outside, but change happens from within, and that's what we've got to do. And we've got to get our act together as a profession.
So, with that, let's call it a day. I appreciate you being on, Dr. Goold. Is there, for people that are listening that are interested in learning more about EQ or really about, your assessment that you do, the 6 types of working genius? And we didn't even really get into that, but I think is there a place where people can go and see your work and get in touch with you?
You bet. So if you hated me and you think I'm a dork, don't reach out to me, please. I don't need any more spam.
I'm sending you a hate email right now as we talk.
You're right. No wonder you're bald. Is my website is SITNA, SITNA solutions.com. And SITNA stands for situations that need attention. So Michael at SITNAsolutions.com. I'm on LinkedIn. Would love to help you out. I have a 3-day leadership class that talks about the 6 working genius. It's all a strength-based positive psychology approach to leadership. Teach it mainly on the West Coast, but would love to come. And it's a lot of assessments and getting to know ourselves, because we can't lead others until we lead ourselves and know ourselves better. So, and then I do have a 1-day EQ workshop that I'm happy to come and do. Very affordable. Comes with an assessment and and a workbook, and it really helps open up the eyes of people once they understand what EQ is, and it's just not some touchy-feely, everybody gets a hug trophy Barney thing. They're like, oh, that's really important. So yeah, Michael at SITNAsolutions.com. Would love to come and work with you. And thanks for having me on. This has been fun.
No, I really appreciate it. And again, we'll have to get together down the line and do this again. And one of the things that I would be really curious to talk about the next time is, the 3-day workshop that you do. It might be fun just to spend like an hour just kind of going through what that curriculum looks like, and so people can get a good understanding of the benefits that can be derived from that. I concur wholeheartedly. It's one of the reasons why I'm passionately engaged with performance protocol to get the more awareness to the executive style coaching and policing. And we're very good at the technical and the tactical skills training. But you just nailed it. You said it. I didn't have to say it, right? How do you lead yourself first? We're good at teaching ourselves, the lessons, the management lessons, the leadership lessons, except in how we apply them to our own life and our own development. We've got room for improvement there. And I think we're turning the corner, and exciting things are ahead. So, all right. I think that's
Cool.
it for today. Thank you for being here, Michael. I appreciate your time. And until the next time, I'm 1042.